Hello, I am Juan, founder and CEO of Torbellino Tech, and in this video I will very briefly talk about how proof of work, specifically in the context of Bitcoin, is wrong. So first, what is proof of work? Here we are considering it in the context of Bitcoin, basically because of the relevance of Bitcoin. Proof of work is a small but nevertheless important part of the consensus mechanism of the Bitcoin protocol. And basically miners compete to solve cryptographic puzzles, and the first to succeed earns the right to add a block. The purpose is to make altering the blockchain costly, since it would require redoing all this so-called work. The question here is, what exactly is meant by work in this context? Why use this word and not others? The word also invites a discussion on the foundations of Bitcoin. And this discussion is relevant because of the relevance of Bitcoin, again, and the observed public discourse, meaning basically what we hear from scientific institutions, technological centers, companies, financial institutions, governments, etc. So there are basically two possible interpretations of work, of proof of work. These are the two most straightforward, I think. There is the physical interpretation of work and the economics or production or labor interpretation of work. And I will talk about other related concepts and interpretations we can make. So proof of work in the physical interpretation. First of all, I am not a physicist, but the details are not important here really. In physics, work has been defined, and the argument is that since Bitcoin mining involves running computations on digital electronic computers, then this qualifies as work because it consumes electrical energy. There are some problems with this interpretation. First is that even in physics, the concept of energy is not universally defined. There's no single universal theory of energy when we consider energy as in this level of abstraction, general, without adjectives. Instead, energy in the field of physics appears in different forms: kinetic, potential, thermal, chemical, electrical. So even if we accept the reduction of work to energy, the term energy is not completely defined in physical terms. In other words, given that the concept of energy is already problematic, if we put Bitcoin on top of that, so to speak, we get greater confusion. Maybe an acceptable name would be proof of electrical energy or proof of electromagnetic energy or something like that. But even this has some challenges, and I will talk about it in a couple of minutes. Then we have the proof of work in the production, labor, or economic interpretation. Mining certainly involves some costs that somehow can be measured, like producing the hardware, producing electricity, employing people, or maintaining the operations of the servers, the mining servers. But here too there is a problem. First of all, energy costs, for example, vary greatly depending on location, infrastructure, regulation, and more generally the economic conditions. So if proof of work is meant to prove that energy was spent, this variation in the number, the variety of effects, and how these effects change across time make this proof highly contingent at best, and the content of the proof itself is not really clear. What does it really mean? What is this proof about, really? So in other words, if the concept of energy interpreted in the physics domain is problematic, the concept of energy understood as a sector of the economy or as some economical concept is even worse from the scientific point of view, in the scientific sense. So the content, again, there is no clear definition of this concept of proof of work. So as possible solutions, some have already tried. I will mention a little bit about that also in a minute. A first idea that may come to mind is just renaming proof of work. I think there's nothing really wrong with Bitcoin in itself or with the implementation of proof of work. The problem is that the naming is misleading. We could rename proof of work to proof of computation, for example. It's a first idea we can have. After all, that's what miners do, actually. They compute hashes repeatedly until a valid one is found. This is a clearly defined process. Is it really? And the proof is that the computation has been carried out. However, even this framing has complications, because computation actually is not absolute. It depends, for instance, on computer architecture. At the outset, we cannot ignore this understanding of computing. The same puzzle is approached differently by CPUs, GPUs, ASICs, application-specific circuits, each with different levels of efficiency and basically a different meaning of what compute is. And other specifications we can consider along the lines. So a task that is computationally costly for one architecture may be trivial for another. This means that even proof of computation is not a universally defined concept when we understand computer or computation in its most general sense. And this also has to do with the issue of proof of electrical energy or proof of electromagnetic energy I was mentioning before. But I will come back in a minute again to proof of computation. So a solution is rename proof of work to proof of signed hash, or proof of hash, simply speaking. This is not pretentious. What miners actually prove is that they have produced a hash that meets the difficulty target, and that it is cryptographically linked to a block and so on and so forth with signature. And both hashing and signing are mathematically well-defined functions. There's no ambiguity here. Beyond this, further labels like proof of work, proof of computation, proof of energy are a stretch if we want to be rigorous. And work and energy specifically are problematic because of the meanings and connotations of these concepts. Also, I think it is useful to contrast this here with proof of stake. I think the terminology is more consistent here. Proof of stake literally demonstrates that validators have locked or staked tokens, and in this case the name matches the mechanism, so it is more scientifically accurate, or at least it is less inaccurate. In particular, we can look at Ethereum's proof of stake, the most popular blockchain implementing proof of stake. And from a computational standpoint, Ethereum is more complex and allows more complex verification processes, which can be specified computationally. Bitcoin's mechanism, by contrast, is relatively simple. It amounts to proving that a hash with certain properties exists. while Ethereum, well, the Ethereum virtual machine is a Turing complete machine. This is one of the main proposals in the origin of Ethereum. And this potentially has to do with the verification processes and the definition of proof of stake. So Bitcoin's consensus is more simple. The machine that processes Bitcoin transactions inside the Bitcoin blockchain is not Turing complete and narrowly focused on hash computation. While Ethereum, the Ethereum protocol allows for a broader set of computational proofs as part of its consensus and execution layers. So in conclusion, how is proof of work wrong? Well, first of all, it is a terminological problem that can lead to misleading interpretations in the context of Bitcoin and the more general context of the public discourse I was referencing before. Commentary by all sorts of organizations. Bitcoin's consensus mechanism is technically effective, but the way it is described is misleading. Proof of work is neither work in the physical sense nor in the economic sense. So for scientific integrity and just to remain reasonable, to use language properly, it could be more precise to change the name. Maybe call this proof of signed hash or proof of hash. Finally, this critique is not a claim that Bitcoin cannot serve as a digital coin or payment system. I have not argued that. It is only an attempt to clarify misconceptions about its foundation so that discussions of its role can be based on a more accurate understanding.